from 1997 through 2015, was on faculty with Evergreen State College, where he covered topics of Native American history, natural history, environmental education, and even served as library dean. Um, the Jeff's love affair with Mount Rainier, I think, really started when he served 2 years with the Youth Conservation Corps immediately after college, working in Mount Rainier National Park. And his love affair has just evolved since then. Jeff has navigated Mount Rainier 5 times on the 93-mile Wonderland Trail. Then that is a hoof. Really a cool thing. He also has summited Mount Rainier, if that wasn't enough. And that's quite an impressive accomplishment as well. But one thing he's done at Mount Rainier that just absolutely has got me envious as all get out. Last September, he and his son witnessed 3 wolverines while they were out hiking on Mount Rainier. So I mean, it's just amazing. It's like a holy grail kind of thing here with Jeff. Yeah, but for Jeff, he lives in Enumclaw, is a member of Rainier Audubon, and as I say, is here with us this evening to talk to us about the special birds of Mount Rainier. So Jeff, thank you very much for being with us.
Fantastic. You folks are really something special. You know that, don't you? Thank you, Vic. You can hear me all right?
We can, yes.
All right, everybody got me okay. Well, it's just great to be back with you folks again. And thank you, Vic, for the really nice introduction. And I get to sit in and listen to your business. You have a scholarship fund. You've given out over $70,000. That's really fabulous. You folks really got some good stuff going on. And you got Michael doing all the webmastering stuff for you. So you got some great things going on. It's really good to be back with you. So thank you for inviting me back. It wasn't actually a headlock that Vic had to put me in. It was more like a body blow, and it knocked me over, and I said, I'll do it. So happy to be doing it. I do live in Enumclaw. I'm sitting at the desk where I wrote most of the book at, and I can look right out there, and the mountain is out tonight, and it's almost as beautiful as Jean's photograph, and it's a little bit closer than the photograph that's behind me tonight. So again, great to be with you. Let's dig in. Let's get after it. Going to share my screen here, folks. Got lots of great images to share with you. So Michael or Nate, if you could just give me the opportunity to screen share. I see right now I don't have it. And so I'll just wait a moment. Still waiting, but no big deal. I love those goals that Michael has. Doesn't it remind you of a goalpost?
You should be good to go now. Sorry.
Yeah, now we got it. No problem. No problem. Oops, oh gosh, I gotta leave because I want to make sure that I've got the audio enabled, because I'm going to share a few audio calls, a few bird calls with you. So now we look like we're good to go. All right. So as Vic said, I was with you folks in November, told you some stories from my natural history of Mount Rainier National Park. It's called Tahoma and its people. WSU Press, Go Cougs, published the book last year. And you probably know Tahoma is one of the Native American names for the mountain. And I'd love to talk more about that, because there's a little bit of a movement right now to possibly give the mountain an indigenous name. So make sure you ask about that when we get to the Q&A if you're interested. Tonight's stories are also, as Vic alluded to, are about some of what I think are some of the most special birds at Mount Rainier. And so we could call it that. I think maybe after you see the talk, you might want to rename it. You might think it ought to be called Shooting Owls, Kidnapping Eggs, and Birds Flying 100 Miles an Hour. Because sadly, and to tell you the truth, all of those things happen in this talk tonight. But until we get there, let's just kind of go with the title, Special Birds of Mount Rainier, okay? And being a birder myself and knowing birders, we love to be quizzed. We love to ID things. You and I are the kind of people that we walk from the house to the car and we're basically identifying everything we see, right? So I thought it would be fun just to kind of start off with a little bird ID quiz. We'll start with some common birds of Mount Rainier. So I'll show you some birds, give you a moment or two just to think about if you know what that is, and then I'll shoot you the answer. Okay, no pressure, low stakes. But am I the only person that is having a really hard time getting used to calling this a Canada Jay? After calling it a gray jay for my entire birding career, to switch over to Canada Jay, that's a challenge, isn't it, when they change the common names on us? Here's the closest living relative of your little backyard buddy. Closest relative of this bird would be the black-capped chickadee. And you might have guessed that this is a mountain chickadee, and one of the common birds at Mount Rainier. Here's a couple more. Well, if it's blue and if it's a bird, it must be a bluebird, right? So if you guess that, well, you got half credit. You get it half right. This is, of course, a mountain bluebird, and photograph taken by a friend of mine who's actually with another birder group, the Trilogy Birders, that have hosted me for a couple of different talks, and Phil's a great photographer. I think this next one might start out with an audio call. So listen to this, and then I'll show you a visual to give you a hint if you need more. Here we go. Does that tell you much? You got an idea? How about the image? Yeah, these birds are known to scare the holy heck out of you when you're walking through the forest because you don't see them, and then they'll suddenly explode from the side of the trail. And of course, we're talking about sooty grouse. At one time was the blue grouse, and it's since been split into a couple of species. The sooty, I think, is the coastal variety, and I think the dusky is the inland species. This photo actually was taken by a former student of mine who worked as an intern at Mount Rainier last summer and is a budding photographer, you can tell. One or two more here. Oh, don't you love this bird? Yeah. Okay, so high altitude, common, one of the corvids, right? Member of the smarty pants family. And of course, what we're talking about here is the Clark's nutcracker. And I tell you, it's so interesting, this bird's relationship with the tree that it's in here, the white bark pine. I could give a whole presentation just on that relationship. Books are written about the mutualist relationship between pines and Clark's nutcracker. And I'll just say one of my favorite factoids is that the Clark's nutcracker is the only bird that comes with its own built-in snack pouch under its tongue. It's actually able to store up to a couple of tablespoons of white bark pine nuts. So it extracts them from these cones that are really hard, tight cones. They're not wind pollinated. So they co-evolved this relationship where the Clarkies has this beautiful, long, sharp bill, takes the cones apart, and it can hold the 70 or 80 white bark pine nuts in a pouch under its tongue. And then it flies off to another part of the mountain and it caches these seeds, 4 or 5 seeds in a little hole, couple inches in the ground, and it's so smart it can remember where it cached them. So when it goes back to them later in the season or the next season, it uses visual cues like a big old growth tree or a stone outcrop to help it figure out where it had cached those seeds. So really cool stuff between the Clarks and white bark pines. And then you probably know there are another few species of birds that people from outside the area come to Mount Rainier specifically to look for. So these are birds that are kind of getting close to the unusual, uncommon, or rare category. And folks come from far away to come to Mount Rainier to try to find these birds. There's 3 of them. Here's the first one. Well, let's see. It looks like it's got a gray crown, right? Oh, you're halfway home. Yeah. So gray crowned rosy finch. And actually, I only see 1 or 2 of these every year. I saw one last summer, usually on snow patches, picking off insects and that sort of thing. Second bird here, people travel to Mount Rainier to see, and this is one of the chickens, so related to the grouse. Of course, this is white-tailed ptarmigan, and like all the grouse, as far as I'm concerned, you never find these birds, they find you. You know, yeah, I can look for a white-tailed ptarmigan for days and days and weeks, and I'll just be minding my own business, and it will cross the trail, you know, leading 5 or 6 chicks across the trail. So that's just the way they seem to be. Now, this last bird that folks travel to the mountain to see, I'm going to give you an audio. So here comes that. Listen up. Got any ideas? All right, well, here's your visual. Yeah, I've never seen this bird at Mount Rainier. I think I've only seen it once up in Canada. So we're talking about the boreal owl. And like lots of the other owls, these guys have those wackadoodle ear holes that are asymmetrical, one's higher than the other. And if you'd like me to talk more about that, just make sure you ask that question when we get to the end. Really interesting physiological feature in a lot of the owls, including the boreals. So now we're going to get to our main attraction. Let's get to the 3 species of birds that I consider really special, all of which I have either chased or helped research, tagged along with researchers in the field. And I think that they all have some pretty interesting stories. They're not the most uplifting. A couple of these birds are really in big trouble. All of these birds are protected under the Endangered Species Act. So here comes our first one. I'm going to start with an audio. So listen up, see if you can guess what this is. Let's catch that one more time. Here we go. Do you have an idea? Well, here's your visual. All right, and here's your multiple choice. Is it woodsy owl, northern spotted owl, C, a great gray, or D, barred owl? Answer is northern spotted owl. This is one of the subspecies, carina, of the northern spotted owl that occurs in our region, in our area. It's found at Mount Rainier National Park. And you know these to be birds of the old growth forests, right? The deep, dark, lush old growth forests. And that's, of course, where they nest primarily. And you probably also know that because of the wide scale logging of the old growth forests in the 19th and 20th centuries, habitat was really decimated for the northern spotted owls. And as a result, their numbers plummeted. And that caused this owl to be listed in 1990 by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as threatened, where it remains today on the Endangered Species Act. There's been a long-term population study of northern spotted owls throughout the West here, and it takes place at Mount Rainier every summer. And I've participated in it. So I'd like to kind of take you on like a virtual field trip, if you will. Let's get out into the field and see if we can find a spotted owl, see what the researchers do, and let's see what the data tells us. What does the outlook seem to hold for northern spotted owls? So here's our goal. Here's what we hope happens, right? We're going to put on our hiking shoes and our day packs, get some snacks and water. We're also going to take with us like a digital playback machine so that we can play calls of northern spotted owl when we're out in its habitat, hoping that the birds will call back to us. And if they do, then we will just race off like crazy people in the direction from which the call has come, hoping to get a look at the adult bird. And if we do spot it, the idea will be to put out one of these lab mice. And that's what that is. That was raised in a lab at Longmire at the park. Put that out on a stump or in a wide area, hoping that the parent bird will come in, gulp down that mouse. And then when we put a second mouse out, the hope is that the adult will come back, grab that mouse, and fly off to take it to its young. And that's the point at which, again, we run off like crazy people, off trail through the woods, careful not to trip over a log or fall in a hole, and to see if we can find the young. And then actually we'll do a little work to capture them safely, humanely, take some measurements and then set them free again. Notice on this bird, it's got a fancy pink and white bracelet. Do you see that on its anklet there? And of course, you probably know this, one of the ways that biologists identify the bird. So this bird has obviously been in contact with biologists before when it was tagged and weighed, measurements, those sorts of things were taken. So this is what we're hoping to encounter. And on this particular day for you and me, it's been our lucky day. So I want you to notice first at the very bottom of the slide, can you see the researcher, see Keith's blue hat? He's got a long pole there, kind of a slip knot noose type of device that he is trying to get around the head of that other outlet that you see that's partially obscured behind that left-hand tree. You can see that. And then of course, directly above Keith's head, you can see its siblings. So we did actually find an adult, fed it 2 mice. The second mouse, the adult took off and led us to these birds. They're very approachable. They are not shy around people, so you can get up pretty close to them. That's what Keith is doing here. And with a little bit of work, the birds can be corralled, safely brought down, measure, I forget everything that we measured, but I forget what you call when you measure part of the wing, of course, weigh them, band them, took some other measurements, maybe made some notes about their molt, what stage they were at in terms of their plumage. And this all takes, 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. And then boom, ready to set the birds free. So that whole event, going after the birds, finding them, making the notes, having our morning snack, all of that just took like half a day. And we were back at Longmire before we knew it. It happened to be a super successful day, and we were super fortunate that all of those things fell into place so well for us that day and for you today too. So let's take a little bit of a look at the numbers. These are 3 sites in Washington that have been monitored for over 20 years. The yellow square are the Rainier plots. And at year 1, you'll see the population size was estimated at 100%. So however many birds they monitored and they were able to identify that first year, they called that 100%. And if you follow the graph through, you'll see that Mount Rainier, by the end of year 20, you see that the population size is down to 40% of the original. So in that 20-year period, a 60% decline in the spotted owl population at Mount Rainier. And the bad news is that this is regionally the characteristic. This is what's going on, the trend. All populations in this region of northern spotted owls are in trouble. They're critically endangered in British Columbia. And there's a little bit of hope going on, and we're going to get to that momentarily. So why? That's to lose a lot of birds, and even to continue after they'd been protected in 1990, that the decline continued. Well, more loss of old growth habitat, even as recently in the 1990s and into the early 2000s, loss of over 1.5 million acres of good spotted owl forest habitat in those 3 states. And probably as big or bigger reason for the decline, an interloper has entered the action here in the last 20 years or so. Who that? That is none other than the barred owl. The barred owl in this case is kind of like a super predator, is the way that I think of them. They have expanded their range. Just in the 20th century, they were kind of an eastern US birds. There's some theories on how they kind of hopscotched across the country, showed up in the Pacific Northwest not that long ago. They are very adaptable to a wide variety of habitats. They can eat, tons of different things, so they have a very broad diet. And their reproductive advantages are that they have more young more often. And these birds are 20% larger than northern spotted owls. So all of that adds up to just the barred owls really being able to outcompete the northern spotted owl in a big way, in a really big way. So this was a big concern to biologists. who were already worried about the northern spotted owl, and then come to find out there's another owl who's basically taken over territory that was not that much territory to begin with for the northern spotted owls to nest in. So after years of debate and hand-wringing and tough decision-making, the Fish and Wildlife Service decided to try a barred owl removal program. They started with a pilot down in the redwoods. And actually, what they started to do was they trained biologists to remove barred owls from northern spotted owl habitat with shotguns. Pretty controversial, using 12 gauge shotguns to remove barred owls. It was their best idea. They didn't want to do it. It was controversial. Animal rights groups sued them immediately as soon as the program began. But continued after the pilot program because there was some success. What biologists found was that spotted owls were returning to habitat right after barred owls had been removed. So they expanded the pilot. Now they've got 3 plots, one in central Washington, Clay Elm, 2 on the, in Oregon near the coast. And you can see the different colored polygons. So the blue ones are the control areas where they did not remove barred owls. Okay, the pinkish red polygons are where they did remove barred owls from, and up through a 5-year period ending in 2019 had removed over 2,000 barred owls. So let's take a little look at that data. I'm going to break this table down for you in just a second. So we're looking at the 3 different sites here, and the one that I want to point out is the blue bar, because that's the Clay Elm that's closest to Mount Rainier, and up the vertical is the number of barred owls removed. So in the non-breeding, that's NB, non-breeding season 15-16, you can see the biologists at Clay Elm removed, looks like about 120 or 125 barred owls. Can you see that? Next non-breeding season, looks like they took out 80-ish, all right? Yeah, breeding season, BR, breeding season 17, they didn't take out any barred owls, and so on across and through 2019. Distilling this data down for you, what does that all mean? What does that look like? Well, it means that in the control areas where they did not remove barred owls, that the spotted owls continued to decline, and they declined pretty drastically by 83%. In the areas where they treated, that is where they removed barred owls, the spotted owl pairs actually increased by about 12%. So again, this bore out, even though it's a difficult decision to have to make, it bore out the idea that removing the barred owls from spotted owl habitat, we're going to give the spotted owls a chance to make a comeback. So big picture, what does it all mean? Well, last I heard, Fish and Wildlife Service was planning to continue the removals up to 3,600. And I forget what the percentage, that's a really small number of the overall population of barred owls. I can't remember, it was like 1% or less than 1%. It wasn't, it just didn't seem like a lot, but 3,600 seems like a lot of owls, right? So other things are, will the northern spotted owl listing changed? Will it be moved up to endangered? That would afford additional protections. We don't really know. And I think that certainly the jury is still out on the future of the northern spotted owls, not just at Mount Rainier, but throughout its range in the West. That's the story on the northern spotted owl. I want to switch gears and move into our second bird. And the news is a little bit better, but again, a pretty interesting story. So here's our second bird, second special bird of Mount Rainier. Wait a minute, Jeff, it's on the water. Huh? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. What is it? What do we got here? How about great auk? How about Cassin's auklet? Marbled murrelet? Pigeon guillemot? Well, great auk is your throwaway, right? It's not A. So answer is marbled murrelet. And I don't know about you, but when I see marbled murrelets, mostly they're on the water. They're in the distance like this, or they're they're flying away from me, or better yet, you just get your glasses up to your eyes and they dive and disappear underneath the water. And you might think, now wait a minute, all these birds are on the water. What does that have to do with Mount Rainier? And again, we're going to get to that momentarily. Here's a shot of a marbled murrelet in the hand of a researcher. And I think apparently a bird in the hand is worth two on the water. I don't know. But just to give you a sense of the size of these birds, they're about the shape and the size of a papaya. Okay, they're lighter than a papaya, and they fly much better than papayas fly. I'm sure of it. But if given the choice for breakfast, I would probably go with a papaya for breakfast. But anyway, that gives you an idea of the size of these things, their shape. They're a member of the alcid family, so that puts them in with the puffins, the guillemots, the murres, those kind of birds, right? Great story. This was the last nest found on breeding birds of North America. All the other 700 and some species, people had found out where these birds bred, and the marbled murrelet was the last mystery bird. And in 1970, our mighty National Audubon Society actually offered a cash reward for the first verified nest of a marbled murrelet. And it was still another 4 years before somebody stumble-bummed into a nest. Actually, it was a couple hundred feet up in the air. And so that's part of the clue of why this is a Mount Rainier bird. But in 1974 was the first nest was discovered high in a Douglas fir tree in a state park in California. So let's take a look at their
You don't have
range.
to have your headphones on. I don't mind listening.
Let's take a look at the range from Central California up the coast through our area, all the way along the BC coast, and all the way out the Aleutian chain in Alaska, where the birds are still common in the 1,000. They've dropped off severely in the last 25 years, but they're still very common out there. And in Washington state, so here, get you oriented, of course, here's Puget Sound, right? Here's Cape Flattery out on the coast. This is the breeding season occurrences in Washington of marbled murrelet. So you would expect ocean birds, seagoing birds, you would expect them to be found out here, right? Sure you would. But what's up with all this? What's going on here? Even at Mount Rainier, look at, here's Mount Rainier. We've got occurrences of marbled murrelets at Mount Rainier National Park. Now, we don't have any verified nest sites at Mount Rainier, but here's what we know. These birds, to me, are just about as wackadoodle as you can get. So the pair lays one egg. If you can call that a nest, it's in this area, they use Douglas firs, most of the way up a Doug fir, big limb, a depression, moss-covered depression in a limb, they lay one egg. And here's an adult on the egg. That, of course, is the scat, the feces around it, around the nest there. And the birds take turns incubating the egg for about 28 days. They run 24-hour shifts. So one of the parent birds will stay on the egg practically motionless for the entire 24 hours. Meanwhile, the other bird is out to sea feeding. And in this case, if we can imagine that there are probably birds breeding at Mount Rainier National Park, because there's plenty evidence of their presence, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So that's about 50 miles from areas where I have recorded marbled murrelets on the Carbon River at Mount Rainier National Park, about 50 miles from there to Puget Sound. Now, that's a long way. So you've got to fly down, feed, and then fly back. Well, imagine this, when the young bird is hatched, the parents then fly back and forth multiple times a day to feed the young bird. So they'll make that trip multiple times. A single bird can fly hundreds of miles in a single day. Can you imagine a marbled murrelet coming back to the nest with one fish, right, draped across its bill, a sand lance or a Pacific herring, an anchovy, something like that, kind of, I don't know, like a fish mustache, I don't know, maybe like a fish Manchu or something. Feed the bird, the young bird, and then turn around and go right back to Puget Sound to continue foraging for the young bird. So the good news about these birds is that they're super fast flyers. They've actually been clocked at 100 miles an hour. So they could give some of the crummy drivers in NASCAR a run for their money, I imagine. But they've been average 45, 55, even 75 miles an hour. These birds are small, they're compact. They've got these sickle scythe-shaped wings, super fast flyers, and they're very cryptic. So they're really only active at dawn. That's when the parent birds switch off the incubating duties at dawn. So it's dark, you can't see anything practically. These birds are super fast, they're cryptically colored, they're solitary nesters. So the chance of seeing these birds, Jeff, it's not good. You're probably not going to see them. And even this bird here is a helper if you need a little bit of help of spotting this bird on the nest. So what we do when we go up the carbon, we're not really planning to see the birds, but we've trained ourselves to listen for them. And here's what we're listening for when we go up the carbon in search of marbled murrelets. Listen to this. So it's that keer that we're listening for. Have to be careful not to be tricked by common nighthawks, that beer, which is also, I've seen nighthawks on the river early in the morning. Get up about 2 a.m., get up to the river about 4:30 in July, set up a lawn chair with a thermos of coffee. Hey, if that sounds like a good idea, send me a message and we can go murrelet hunting this summer. It's a gas. I've heard them just about every time I've gone up the river listening for them, and I've never seen one. One of my partners who went with me a few times thinks he may have seen one fly by, but I've never actually seen one, but we've heard plenty. So even despite all these evolutionary strategies to protect themselves, fast flyers, crypto plumage, solitary nesters, nesting in a crazy place like old growth forests, all those things, still they are prey for lots of things, and lots of nest failures occur, and most of them are tracked to the corvids. So this Steller's jay, crows, ravens. In fact, in some areas in California, rangers have adopted a program that they've called Feed a Jay, Kill a Murrelet. And what they mean with that is they try to educate visitors to refrain from feeding birds like the jays and crows, because that draws them in. And then they're smart enough to figure out where the murrelets are nesting, and the murrelets may become prey. But they've got bigger problems than predation, the murrelets do. Very similar to the northern spotted owls, loss of nesting habitat a lot in the last 20 years. And that has really shown up in a very severe population decline in Washington. The marbled murrelet, an on-water survey by Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife showed almost a 50%, a 44% drop in a 15-year period. So if you're a longtime birder like me, and you've been saying to yourself in the wintertime, man, I'm not seeing marbled murrelets like I used to. Well, there's a reason for that. There are fewer murrelets on Washington waters. They're stable. They're doing better in Oregon, in California. And as I said, there are still plenty of them in Alaska, but even there they've dropped, I think, 70% in the last 25 years. So this is a bird that's definitely still has some problems. And to such an extent that Fish and Wildlife in the state would like them to get endangered status, move from state threatened to state endangered, so that they would get some more protections. Biologists also want to know if it would be possible to provide some incentives to landowners who could really do a lot to preserve some of the habitat for marbled murrelets. And they also want to know whether or not these birds will successfully nest in second growth forests. And so I think there's some work underway to determine whether or not that can happen. Another question about the murrelet's future has to do with its food source. And so these fish that I mentioned, the anchovies and sand lance and so on, as climate change continues and ocean waters continue to warm and acidify, what effect is that going to have on the forage fish that these birds prey on? We don't know that yet. So again, the outlook for the murrelets, like the northern spotted owl, doesn't look fantastic at this point. But I can tell you, I know a bunch of people who are really working on these birds' behalf the best they can to try to figure this out and see if they can get these numbers going in the right direction. So let's head to our last bird. And this is actually kind of a happy ending story. So this one is going to kind of lift us up a little bit with this bird. Full disclosure, I've got to tell you the truth. This bird, I hope you're okay with this, doesn't actually occur within the boundaries of Mount Rainier National Park. I hope you're okay with that, but it's a watershed bird. You know that the Nisqually Glacier begins at the summit of Mount Rainier. It gives birth to the Nisqually River, which flows 78 miles to another one of our favorite places where it empties into Puget Sound at Billy Frank Jr., Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge. So this is a bird of the Nisqually prairies. I hope you're okay with that. Let's identify it. First of all, who do we have here? Are we looking at angry bird, American pipit, western meadowlark, or horned lark? Well, it's definitely an angry looking bird, but that's your throwaway. Okay. So yeah, we're looking at a subspecies of the horned lark. This is Eremophila alpestre strigata, the streaked horned lark. Look at the fancy bracelets on this character. Isn't that something? That bird has been banded more than once. Yeah, you can tell. So here's a little information, a little natural history lowdown on the streaked horned lark. This is a bird of the prairies. This is one of the 24 subspecies of horned lark. So the horned larks that my wife and son and I saw last week in eastern Washington when we were out birding, different subspecies. The horned lark that I see every summer up at Mount Rainier, alpini, a different subspecies. This is one of the 24, the streaked horned lark. And as I said, this is a bird of the prairie. You might know that native prairie once ran all the way from Oregon, all the way north up into BC, up to Vancouver Island. And what we've got left now is just a little pieces, fewer than just a few percent of the native prairie that remains. And as you can imagine, if you've lost that much habitat, you're going to have a huge decline in biodiversity. My last count, there were like 46 species of plants that were on various watch lists, state and federal threatened and endangered lists. Half of the bird species have suffered from a range reduction, a population loss, or some have even been extirpated altogether. So the streaked horned lark was in that category. A loss of habitat, really in big trouble in terms of its numbers. This is a biologist's take on what might have been the historic range 100 years ago of streaked horned larks. We can see them on Vancouver Island here. We can see them in southwesternmost BC, down into Puget Sound. We're going to talk about this population where there are still some. We're going to visit those in just a minute. And then some questions as to whether or not there were streaked horned lark populations out on the coast, Willapa Bay, along the Columbia. And then we're pretty sure there were and still are some down in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. The ones we're going to zero in on are the South Puget Sound sites. So these are nesting sites as they are today. Okay, this data is from a couple of years ago, but you see a handful of sites here, a few out on the coast, several down along the Columbia. And so we're going to get friendly with one of the South Puget Sound sites, and in particular, the sites at Joint Base Lewis McChord. And you probably know that that's the huge Army Air Force base that's between Tacoma, here's Tacoma, between Tacoma and Olympia. And these black polygons represent where there are streaked horned larks study sites. So this is where we have birds breeding at these sites at Joint Base Lewis McChord. I'm going to call it by its abbreviation JBLM, or as my kids like to call it, Jablam. And also there's some study sites at the Olympia Airport and out at Shelton at the Sanderson Airport. Now, you can't go looking for these birds, right? Because they're protected under the ESA. It's the breeding season right now. And so the best we can do, you and I can do, we can do a virtual field trip like we did for the spotted owls. So let's do that. Let's go out to the prairie and check it out. So we're on the Nisqually Prairie. We're about, I don't know, 40 miles or so from, maybe a little more, maybe 50 miles from the mountain itself, but we're in the Nisqually watershed. See any birds? Do you see any birds? Here's a helper. That's a close-up. Do you still see any birds? And here's a helper if you need. So, oh boy, ground nesters, bad idea. But, you know, evolution, right? That's how these birds evolve. Fortunately, the chicks are pretty cryptic. The nests are very well concealed. Even still, predation is a part of the deal. And why do you think this researcher is looking so frumpy? This is a former student of mine, Adam Martin, a biologist. And let's take a close-up. Oh, that's why Adam is looking so sad. This is a streaked horned lark nest that has been predated. You can see this egg that's been broken open here. So garter snakes, coyotes, western meadowlarks, northern harriers, these are all predators of the streaked horned larks. And again, like the marble murrelets, predation is not its biggest problem. What really alarmed researchers was when they found that these birds had a very low hatch rate. It wasn't as high percentage of eggs were hatching as they should be. And they had a very low fledging rate, low numbers of birds that were actually being recruited into the adult ranks. And so what they figured out was they had some low genetic diversity. These birds were inbreeding at Joint Base Lewis McChord. And so they hatched an idea, sorry about that pun, but they came up with an idea for what they called a genetic rescue project. And actually, that's just scientific talk for an elaborate kidnapping plot. Here's what they decided to do. They located a really robust, healthy population at the Corvallis Airport in Oregon. These are birds that will re-nest 4 or 5 times in a single season. So if you swipe one nest, the birds that have lost their nest are probably going to rebuild and try again. So when the conditions are perfect, researchers would drive down early morning hours to Corvallis Airport, scoop up a nest with eggs in it, drive it back to Joint Base Lewis McChord, put it into the Nisqually Prairies, with the hope and the idea they were putting it into the area where there was a bonded pair of streaked horned larks that would adopt the nest and eggs and raise young that they did not produce. And believe it or not, it works. Crazy, and it works. So this is not a pan of lasagna that's going to the company potluck. This is one of those incubators. This is a plug-in incubator that here's what's inside. This is an average size clutch of streaked horned lark's eggs that have been brought up from the Corvallis Airport. So if everything goes perfectly, you get the eggs back up here in the incubator, they're still intact. Then if everything goes perfectly, kaboom, you get nestlings. Now, this is not the same clutch. This was a super healthy female that really kind of outdid herself. See if you can count how many streaked horned lark beaks are in this picture. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, one more, 6. Is that wild? She had 6 young. Yeah. So as we start to wrap things up here and start to leave the streaked horned larks to their own business, I want to be sure to introduce you to Brian. Brian, who is not only the champion of the bracelets with 2 on each leg, but is one of those birds that actually began its life as an egg at the Corvallis Airport, was translocated up to Jablam, and had recorded of going back to Joint Base Lewis McChord at least 3 times to breed. What that means is the genetic diversity is being increased because here's a bird from another population that is coming back to breed here. So that's really good news. And there's more good news about the streaked horned larks. They started a program, the biologists started a program at JBLM where they call it a conservation measures. And what they did was they put people on the ground, on foot, finding nests. And they would track them and they would locate them with GPS. And they would communicate that information to the managers at JBLM who ran training exercises, who ran the airfields. So people knew where there were nests. And so they could change the mowing regime. They could quit mowing in those areas. They could have their training go someplace else so it wouldn't endanger the birds. And that's had a remarkable positive impact. In fact, increasing to 50 pairs at McCord Field in just 8 years, from 8 to 50, an increase by over a factor of 6. And on the native prairies, again, a nice increase from 12 pairs to 40 pairs in the last 10 years, just by this conservation measure. So that's some really, really good news. There's still some challenge, and that is that there's not a lot of this conservation work that's going on off base. So at the Shelton Airport and the Olympia Airport, they're still having decreasing lark numbers. And what Department of Fish and Wildlife is in the process of doing is working with those airport managers, hopefully to institute these same kind of on-foot surveys. Hopefully that will enable them to change their mowing practices and to give these birds a chance at those airports. So as we start to put a bow on tonight's talk, I'm going to just take you back through you can call it a quiz, just a review, so we can kind of agree that we can land on some of the main ideas from tonight's talk. These first two are about spotted owls. This one is I think this is true false, yeah. Northern spotted owls are declining at Mount Rainier, but are doing well in other portions of their range. True or false? Sorry, that's a false one. Here's multiple choice. The two key factors in the decline of northern spotted owls are loss of old growth habitat, poaching by hunters, competition from barred owls, lack of prey. Looking for two things that have caused the decline, and they are A, loss of old growth, and competition from barred owls. All right, let's take a look at the marble murrelets. Here's a true and false. Appear to be the only alcid that nests in old growth forests. True or false? Yeah, that's what we're thinking. Everybody else has got a different plan than the murrelets, than the marbles. Here's a multiple choice for these birds. Marble murrelet numbers may improve or could improve with two developments. We're looking for two things here. Breeding programs to train the birds to have larger clutches. Good luck with that one. Landowners could be persuaded to preserve habitat, predator removal programs that begin and succeed, or murrelets can adapt to nesting in second growth forests. You're looking for two ideas that we've talked about that could help their numbers, and they are preservation of habitat by landowners, B, and D, that the birds can adapt to nesting in second growth forests. And finally, a couple of questions for our friend the streak-torn lark. True or false? Just one of many prairie bird species impacted by habitat loss. True or false? Sure enough, there's a whole bunch of them, about 20 species or so. Number 6, last one, multiple choice. All of these factors contribute to the lark's recovery except one. What is it? Increasing the frequency of mowing. B, the Oregon Nest Translocation Project. C, nest finding and other conservation measures. D, communicating nest locations to airfield managers. Just one of these is not in practice and wouldn't help matters at all. And that is A, increasing the frequency of mowing. So if you want to check and see how you did on those 6 questions, I'd say no worries. I hope you've had a good time and quizzed yourself a little bit and learned a few things. I'd say you're probably flying high if you got 3 or 4 right. And well, you're probably as smart as a Clark's Nutcracker if you got them all right. And that's pretty smart. So just a couple public service announcements real quick. If you're interested in a copy of the book, it's widely available. Support your local bookstore. Get it from your local bookstore. You can get it from me online. I can sign the book if you like. Also, I've got other talks. Some of you saw the Tahoma's Biggest Stories that I did for you folks in November. That's all about Native people in Mount Rainier, going to the mountain for over 9,000 years and the far-reaching effects of climate change. And the other talk that I haven't shared with you folks is a virtual field trip in the Nisqually River watershed. Talk about the first people of the watershed, the Nisqually-Opsh, people of the river, people of the grass, the Nisqually people. And then we take a trip from the river's beginning, the Nisqually, all the way down to the refuge where it runs into Puget Sound. So if you like stories, if I've been a wee bit entertaining, I've got a story every month that I send out via my blog. There's no strings attached. I don't sell addresses. I just got stories to share, and I'm writing another one for next month. So if you like that, you can find me. It's just my name, jeffantonelis-lapp.com. And with that, I'm going to stop share. Really looking forward to your questions, and let's have a good time with those.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Before we go to questions, just want to let you know that Adrian Wolf is on the call.
Now, please direct your street-horn lark questions to Adrian, because everything I know, I learned from him. He was a super big help. Yeah, biologist.
Once again, if you have any questions, you can put them down in the chat, and I'll go ahead and relay them to Jeff so that he can answer them. So we do have one question here from Mark, and he's asking why the biologists survey the marbled murrelets in July rather than May. Is that because they're traveling more often when feeding young and thus vocalizing?
Exactly. So the peak of the breeding season is July-ish. They start as early as March, but that's when there's going to be the most traffic coming up the rivers. And it's not just birds that are going to be nesting up there. Sometimes it's young birds, or it's birds that aren't necessarily nesting that year that might be scouting for future nest sites. So July is really when the birds are calling the most, and when there's the most activity, I would say, more than any other time of the year, at least in the forests. Yeah.
Well, great. And while we're waiting for a few more folks to put questions in, Steven says, great event, and thanks to Kitsap Audubon. And Bonnie also says, awesome program, Jeff. Thank you.
Oh, here's a good question from Meridell. Do you see that one, Michael?
I do, yes.
Yeah. So Meridell wants to know, why do larks seem to inhabit areas around airports? Is it because of the open space without forests? Good thinking, good question. It's not because they need the frequent flyer miles. I don't think. Oh, I got a chuckle out of you on that one. I think you're right that those airports are close to grassland, prairie, habitat that are very, and may not be the original kinds of habitat that these birds preferred, but it's pretty close. And when you think of airports as being places where every airport I think I've ever been at has been mowed around the edges and those sorts of things, kind of a grassy spot. So that would be the right kind of habitat for street-horn larks. And we got a good question about the boreal owl. So Marnie wants to know about the what's that crazy thing about the boreal owl. And some of you probably know this, because this is not a feature that is unique to the boreals, but many owls, not all, but many owls have their ear holes are positioned asymmetrically. And when you think about that, and if you can think about geometry and locating things out in space, you and I don't know about you, but I'm terrible at locating where a sound is coming from. In fact, when we were on our walk tonight, we had the darndest time locating that woodpecker, probably a flicker, that's been banging on a tree all day, and we couldn't find it. But an owl, with those ears positioned asymmetrically, then they're able to basically do some 3D triangulating to where that object is, and they have a much better chance of locating their prey. And you know that many of them are nocturnal, they're working in the dark to begin with, so they need all the help that they can get. So that kind of a feature is really going to aid them in locating their prey.
Yeah, Don has a question about any chance it would be possible to create native prairie where none exists now.
I don't know about that, but I do know that what they're really active in the Nisqually prairie, in the Nisqually Valley, the watershed, the prairie, they're in doing is to try to restore some of what they have lost. And so when Vic asks me back next year for the virtual field trip in the Nisqually watershed, we're really dig into that, where they actually are, they're doing some amazing projects to kind of restore some of the ancestral prairie lands. And that's the best that I got that I know. I don't know otherwise anybody who's doing anything kind of like from scratch to create prairies, but they're trying to salvage lands in the Nisqually that at one time were bona fide prairie. There's some really neat projects that they've got going on to do some of that.
Cool. And Steven's asking about the boreal owls. What are their predators? Oh,
Gosh, I'm not sure, except I would imagine the bigger owls just eat them for lunch. I'm just guessing. How about northern goshawk? Right? If anybody knows, pipe up, speak up, or put it in the chat feature. But I'm just thinking, something bigger and tougher, and great horned owls would probably love to have a boreal owl for lunch.
So Jeff, I have a quick question. You had mentioned when you're out with the spotted owls, you had some lab mice that you were using. Is that mice the main prey that they go after, or do they have other?
Oh, Michael, killer question. And actually, in this region, their main food is the northern flying squirrel.
Oh.
Yeah. And I'm telling you, that's a rabbit hole to go down, because the relationship between spotted owls, northern flying squirrels, what are those crazy spores that grow in the ground, that the squirrels dig up and eat? Oh man, it's just an amazing ecological triangle. But that's their main food source in this region, are the flying squirrels.
And the squirrels go after the truffles, is that right?
Yeah, thank you.
that was Judy. Judy gave us that.
Thank you, Judy. Truffle on. I hope that was no truffle for you to come up with that.
Any other questions? Feel free to put them in the chat. I'm sure Jeff will have a great response.
I'll make something up if I have to.
Yeah.
And, I would just say that, if you folks ever plan like a birding trip up to Mount Rainier, I'm probably not the best birder guide. I mean, I'm a good birder, but I'm sure you might even have people in your group that would be better Mount Rainier birders than me. Like, I don't know all the songs, of all the birds up there. But if you ever were going to go up there, invite me along, because we can do lots of other cool stuff. I can, share lots of other neat cultural stuff with you, and some of the other natural history stuff. And it's always a hoot to go with groups, especially people that are really into it like you folks. So if you do a field trip, if you go to Mount Rainier, count me in. I'd be happy to come with you. Anything else?
Stephen had a sidebar, 24 hours to see a puffin. Where would you go?
To see a puffin? Well, when I did that with my land-loving nephew from Indiana, we just headed straight out to the coast. I mean, I think around, like, was it Claylock? We got lucky, but you folks probably use the Birder's Guide to Washington, right? The book for locating. That would be the book that I would look in, and then of course get on tweeters and beg people to give me good information. But out to the coast. Oh, Seaside. What's that called? Haystack Rock down at Cannon Beach. Right now, we're going to go down in a few weeks, and I bet we got a high probability of seeing puffins down there on the rock. Yeah, you can do that in 24 hours. Yeah. Wow, that was fun. Thanks, Michael. You do a really good job. And then Nate, back up there, smashing the Zoom bombers. Good job.
Yeah, it's always fun to have you on, and lots of people saying thanks. Great talk.
Great.
Wonderful program. So
good. Glad you enjoy it. It's a real pleasure doing it. And thanks again, Vic. I really, really appreciate you reaching out. And who knows, maybe we got one more maybe we got one more rabbit in our hat. All right. Anything else tonight, Michael, or did we clean up all the questions?
Yeah, it looks like that's all the questions.
Yeah,
Like Adrian said,
yeah,
going ahead, Oregon for puffins for sure.
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. If Adrian says it, then go there.
And I will just take advantage of my position here and let you all know that Adrian actually is now our Great Peninsula Conservancy's stewardship manager. So he's in charge of all of our properties. So we're very excited to have him. It's
Oh,
really
man, you hit the gold mine there, Nate.
great. Tell me about it.
Yeah, you guys really hit the jackpot there. Congratulations, Adrian. I knew that you were moving on from CNLM, so sounds like you landed in a good spot. Congratulations. And now I know how to track him down.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, good to see you. All right, anything else?
No, we appreciate you joining, and thanks everyone for attending, and have a great rest of your night.
All right, thanks again, Michael.